So good afternoon, everyone. Director General of KFAS, Dr. Amin Al-Farhan, distinguished guests, colleagues from KFAS and KU, and our lovely students. It's my great honor to welcome you all to a truly inspiring lecture today. We're privileged at Kuwait University to host a remarkable scientist, a visionary leader, and a global advocate for scientific excellence and inclusion, Dr. Maarsha Maacknout, President of the United States National Academy of Sciences. It is very interesting to note that exactly 19 years ago to the date, on January 8, 2007, Dr. Maacknout was actually in Kuwait giving a talk as a distinguished scientist at the Conference of Women Leaders in Science, Technology, and Engineering. I think I have a picture of that here somewhere. 1 second. Somebody help? So it was 19 years ago, January 8th, 2007. You age really well, Dr. Maacknout, and I think you prefer winters in Kuwait. So let me give you a brief on Dr. Maacknout's amazing achievements over the years. Dr. Maacknout is a pioneering American geophysicist with a bachelor's in physics from Colorado College and a PhD in earth sciences from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. She's an award-winning scientist with more than 25 years of experience as a geophysicist, and her work has shaped our understanding of the Earth's oceans and critical geological processes. In 2016, Dr. Maacknout became the first woman ever elected president of the US National Academy of Sciences, which is known as the House of Science in the US and was established more than 160 years ago. So after 21 male presidents, Dr. Maacknout was the 22nd, and she was the first female president of the US National Academy of Sciences. Being a president of the US National Academy of Sciences is considered one of the highest scientific honors in the world, an achievement that continues to inspire women, including myself, in science across generations. Before leading the Academy, Dr. Maacknout made history as the first woman to direct the US Geological Survey from 2009 to 2013. During her time there, she guided the agency through some of the world's most significant natural and environmental disasters, including the devastating earthquakes in Haiti, Chile, and Japan, and the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, which is the largest marine oil spill in history in 2010. Her leadership in coordinating scientific teams during the oil spill responses earned her the US Coast Guard Meritorious Service Medal for exemplary service. Beyond her government leadership, Dr. Maacknout is an extraordinary researcher as well and has an extraordinary research legacy. She has led more than a dozen deep-sea excursions, served as chief scientist on many of them, and she also serves as editor-in-chief of the journal Science from 2013 to 2016. Her academic career includes professorships at MIT, Stanford University, and the University of California, Santa Cruz, institutions where she trained the next generation of scientists. Today, we are all eager to hear from Dr. Maacknout and your scientific journey and what you've learned along the way. She has broken barriers, reshaped institutions, and used her platform to champion women's advancements in STEM fields. Her presence here today in Kuwait is a reminder that excellence knows no gender, and that leadership in science must reflect the diversity of the world it serves. Please join me in welcoming an extraordinary scientist and an inspiring leader to the stage, Dr. Maarsha Maacknout.
Well, thank you so much, Dalal, for that wonderful and very embarrassing introduction. And I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Amin Al-Farhan for the wonderful partnership we have had with KFAS and the absolutely spectacular visit I've had here. The hospitality of Kuwait is legendary around the world, and I'm so happy to have experienced it. in such an extraordinary way since I've been here. For those of you listening to this talk, let me warn you ahead of time, there's not much science in this, okay? Rather than talking about the science I've done in my career, I decided for this lecture, I'm in the twilight of my career right now. I only have a few months until my term as Academy President is over. And so this actually gave me a good opportunity to think back of what did I learn along the way in my career, and would any of those lessons be helpful, particularly to the students here at Kuwait University? I see a lot of faculty and a lot of administrators, and I'm sure you know it all. But I think for the students, hopefully, there'll be a few bits that they glean from this that will be useful. So the first thing I wanted to start with is the importance of knowing yourself if you want to become a scientific leader. And I'll tell you a story behind this. After I had been at MIT for about 15 years teaching there, I was invited to come to be the director of a brand new, small, private oceanographic research institute in California called the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. The institute was founded and funded by David Packard to be a NASA for the oceans. He wanted a lab that would do radically not dangerous, but very high-risk projects that would allow us to understand the oceans better than we had. And he wanted it to be a teamwork between engineers and scientists working together to bring the latest tools from engineering technology and apply them to the exploration of the oceans. Now, when I was asked to be the director there, the institute had only been open for 5 years. And in those 5 years, they had gone through 5 directors. So I was the 6th one to come. And the problem with the institute was that it had 4 divisions: science, engineering, marine operations, and an education and outreach arm. And those 4 divisions weren't working well together. They were working at cross purposes with each other, and that's why none of these directors had been able to get the place to work. So when I arrived, the first thing I did was I brought some consultants in to do a personality survey of everyone in the institution. So everyone filled out this questionnaire, which asked innocuous questions. They had no right or wrong answer, but just what would you do in this situation? What would you do in that situation? And what we found was that across the institute, what kind of personality type, there were 4 kinds of personality: green, gold, orange, and blue, with no, positive or negative connotation with any of them. But all the scientists in the institution were greens. All of the engineers were gold. All of the marine operations people were orange. And all of the education and outreach people were blue. And it was so strong in the institution that when engineering hired a woman to come work there, and it ended up, she had the orange personality. Within 2 months, she switched to operations. That's how strong these different personality types were. And so what determined the difference between a blue, a gold, an orange, and a green? Well, what determined it was what you valued. The scientists all cared only about, did you get the answer right? If you didn't get the answer right, what was the point in even addressing the problem? They could care less about the budget. They could care less about the schedule. If you didn't get it right, you had to keep blowing the budget and working beyond the schedule in order to do it. Now, the engineers, instead of being get it right, engineers have a process. They wanted everyone to do it right. And the engineers said to the scientists, there's not just one right solution. There can be many right solutions. One solution might minimize the cost. One might minimize the time it takes to do it. One might maximize compatibility with other systems. And so there's no one right answer, but there's a process you follow in order to get the solution you want. So they were all about process. The operations people, on the other hand, the only question they asked was, did you get it done? And so if they took a new engineering device out to sea, they might bring it back with it re-engineered with duct tape and tie wraps, and the engineers would look at it and they say, what happened to my beautiful instrument? And the marine operations people would say, well, the length of it was too long to clear the deck and the A-frame, and the leader on the instrument didn't go through the sheave, so we did some re-engineering at sea, but hey, we got it tested and your instrument works. And the engineers are going, well, where are all the change orders for all the changes you made? And by that time, the marine operations people were already down the street at the bar having a beer saying, we got the job done. And then the fourth group, the comms people, all they cared about, they didn't care about if you got the right answer or used the right process or even if you got the job completed. They cared about how did everyone feel about it? Did we all have a good time? Were we all happy with what we did? And these four divisions were so extreme that what we had to do was help the scientists understand the engineers and the operations people and the communications people and everything around that, so they would understand why it is that they're doing things differently and start to collaborate better with each other. But what I thought was interesting was when I took the test. When I took the test, my personality came out 50% get it right. Well, I'm a scientist, so of course I was dominated by that get it right personality. But I was 25% do it right, 25% of the engineering mind frame, and 25% of you better get the job done. I was 0%. How did everyone feel about it? And I realized that as the new leader of that institution, if I didn't spend more time worrying about bringing the rest of the institution along with me, I was going to fail. And I'll tell you, you heard from Dalal that a number of jobs I held at Science and USGS and at the Academy, I was the first woman. And I felt like, even though there had been 5 people to fail before me at MBARI, I felt if I failed, it wouldn't be, oh, just someone else didn't get it right. It would be a woman can't do the job. And so I always felt this incredible burden of not being allowed to fail, because if I did, it would reflect badly on women researchers everywhere. So this was, I think, very helpful for me to understand where I fit in this personality spectrum. And it was so interesting because I now can just mentally, once I get to know someone, I can map them into this. And for example, the blue, make sure everyone is fine with it. You might think, well, that sounds like something that's kind of non-scientific, to care about what people feel. But it was the people in that blue circle there who were the dreamers. They saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. And so those were the people you really did want to have on your team, because they did not get stuck in the status quo. They were always willing to go one step further and do something new. So my first thing is it helps to know yourself. Then the second thing I'll say, and this is particularly true for the young people here, you have to find a way to stand out from the crowd. You know, Kuwait is fortunate in that you're a fairly small country, and the science community is small enough that you know each other. But once you start venturing out internationally, you're going to have the same problem that we have in America or the Chinese happen in China. that there are so many scientists and so many young aspiring people who want to become science leaders, that how do you stand out from the crowd? So some of the things I learned along the way is it's so important to present at meetings and conferences. And if you have chosen a new or unconventional area of investigation, you can actually define your own field. And that is a fabulous way to stand out from the crowd. For example, when I was in college, I was, my undergraduate advisor was trying to convince me to go to graduate school. And I wasn't sure what I would study in graduate school. He handed me the first Scientific American article ever written on the theory of plate tectonics. It was the first paper for a non-expert that explained how plate tectonics worked. And I thought to myself, wow, if I go into that field, I'm getting in on the ground floor. It's like going into physics right after Einstein writes his special theory of relativity, or going into biology right after Watson and Crick came up with the double helix. It was a chance to get in the ground floor early in a field and define your own path through it. So I think that was one very fortunate thing I did. The other thing that I'd suggest to people is promote your manuscripts and meeting presentations to leaders in the field. You know, most of us just we put something out there in a journal and we're hoping that people see it. But what you can do is actually build up an email list of the top people in your field. Send them all a copy of it. Say, I think you might be interested in this paper, and then pull out a tidbit or two in the email of why that person might be interested in it. Same if you're going to give a presentation at a meeting. I had so many students that, as their advisor, I would do this for them. I'd say, my student is going to be presenting a paper at this meeting. I think you should go by. And they did. They actually did, and they got to know my students, and they all got great jobs. Also, develop critical thinking skills. I think it's very important for someone who wants to stand out, that you be seen as someone who can quickly analyze where someone else's science is going and what are the pros and cons of it. So if you develop critical thinking skills, then at an international meeting, for example, you will be the person that stands up and asks that penetrating question that everyone says, whoa, that was a great question. I wonder how the speaker's going to answer that. So you can really stand out just by the questions you ask. And you also, when you develop critical thinking skills, you can provide constructive feedback. Become a good reviewer. You can really stand out with top people in your field if you give very insightful reviews of their papers. Okay, and journals, as I say, offer an easy path to establishing critical thinking skills. For example, when I was a relatively young researcher, just a couple years out of graduate school, I became an associate editor of the Journal of Geophysical Research. And that was a wonderful opportunity to see everyone else's work before it even is published and understand how your research is stacking up to that of others. And I remember one paper I reviewed for Science magazine. I signed the review, and I got back from the authors, we'd like to offer reviewer A co-authorship because I found the fatal flaw in their paper and told them how to fix it. And so they offered to put me on the paper, which of course I didn't do because I was just a reviewer. But anyway, that was fun. I would also encourage young people to embrace the disruptive. As I said, the plate tectonics was a paradigm shift in the geosciences. I got in early on the ground floor, so paradigm shifts are always great. AI is a huge paradigm shift right now, and I'm sure everyone in this audience is finding ways to incorporate AI into their research. new technologies, new ideas, and also with people who think differently than you. There's a tendency to pick a co-author who's thinking the same way. But if you find a co-author who thinks very differently, very often that's when the most original creative thinking can get done. And let me just end this part by saying, if your thinking is not evolving, you are dying intellectually. And I remember a leader in my field. I was at some meeting with him, and it was at a time decades ago when there was a lot of debate in the earth science community of what the scale was of thermal convection in Earth's mantle. Some people thought that it was layered, with the asthenosphere being much less viscous and operating on a faster time scale than the lower mantle, and some thought it was all one big system. And as different pieces of evidence came in from geochemistry, from seismology, etc., what people were finding was that the pendulum was kind of shifting back and forth in favor of one model or the other, depending on new evidence. And this professor said, as this new evidence came in, anyone who didn't change their mind based on new evidence was obviously so much in love with their own original thinking in their original papers that they refused to see the evidence for what it was. So he didn't trust anyone who didn't change their mind in light of new evidence. And here I just show the technologies that are really changing how we live today and that are also useful for research. And then the next lesson I wanted to mention is how important it is to figure out what counts and do that. For example, whether you're a university faculty member, whether you're in government, whether you're in industry research, they all have different metrics. So you need to learn what the metrics are for your part of the research enterprise and figure out how you're going to demonstrate that if you want to get ahead. In academic work, it's very often publications. In industry, it's often profits. For government workers, they want to have a positive impact on the citizens. They want to find better nutrition, better environmental health, etc. And then as you advance in your career, you can set your own priorities. So for example, when I was first starting out, I was really trying to establish myself as knowing one topic better than other people. But then, as you get tenure and you get established, you can start venturing out into brand new fields and doing new things. This little picture here I put was from a set of Post-it notes that one of my fellow faculty members gave me at MIT. And it says, "Of course I don't look as busy as the men. I did it right the first time." And I just love that sentiment because, you know, there is a huge difference in having to go back and doing something over and over again. I try to make sure that my first draft of a paper is submittable. I try to make sure that my first draft of a presentation will work, et cetera, because if you have to do something over and over again, then you aren't going to get much done. The next thing I wanted to mention, for young people especially, is you need to learn when to say yes and when to say no. Saying yes too often is going to interfere with the previous slide, and that is doing what counts. And saying no too often will leave you out of sight, out of mind. You won't get noticed. So I remember when I was an assistant professor at MIT, my department head called me in, and he said, "Bring your CV with you. I want to take a look at it." So I brought my CV, I handed it to him, and he goes through and he says, what's this committee you're on? I said, well, that is a very important committee of the National Academy of Sciences. And he says, resign, resign, resign. And he went down through my list and told me all these things I should resign from so I could focus just on my teaching and research. Well, I didn't follow all of his advice. I did try to lessen the load, but I felt that working through some of these committees with people who were way above me in the hierarchy would be a way to get noticed. And I think that is the advice I give people today. Be judicious in when you say yes, but make sure if you are putting time out of what is directly going to count for your hiring, promotion, tenure, make sure that you have enough time to do what counts, but also to get noticed, so you will have new doors opening for you. So I particularly wanted to talk about Frontiers of Science and the impact that that had on me. I'm sure there are some people here who aren't familiar with Frontiers of Science, so let me just give a little bit of background. Frontiers of Science is a series of meetings that was begun by one of my predecessors, Frank Press, who was the president of the National Academy of Sciences back in the 1970s or so, 70s, early 80s. And Press's concern about the scientific community in America was that different fields were proposing major new investments in infrastructure that they wanted to do. The superconducting super collider for high energy physicists, orbiting telescopes for astronomers, observatories, land observatories for ecologists across the country and across the world, new ships for oceanographers. And what Press saw as the problem here was that no one outside that field could understand why that new instrumentation would be so important. And these groups couldn't even talk to each other. In a first-year biology class, you learn more new vocabulary than you do in a first-year foreign language class. So basically the problem was the physicists, the chemists, the biologists, the earth scientists, the engineers, they all spoke different languages. And it was like a Tower of Babel, them getting together and trying to figure out how do we decide which of these projects is the most important to do first and will have the biggest impact. So Press decided to start this series of meetings called Frontiers of Science. The first one was just American scientists, but you had to be young. You had to be under 45 years old to go to this meeting. And the speakers there had to talk about what was the frontier in their field, make other people understand it and appreciate it, and do it without using any jargon at all. So this was an experience in scientific communication like no other. And what I learned in this, well, one thing that I learned was that the second year I went, the first year I was a speaker. The second year I went, I was on the organizing committee. Two other people on the organizing committee with me that year, and this was the early 1990s, I think, were Steve Chu, a physicist, and Jane Lipchenko, an ecologist. And we became good friends and stayed in contact after Frontiers. So fast forward 20 years later, and the Deepwater Horizon oil spill happens. Steve Chu is Secretary of Energy. Jane Lipchenko is head of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and I was head of the US Geological Survey. And the three of us were on the front lines of addressing that oil spill. And the important thing was, we weren't out there exchanging business cards in a crisis. We already knew each other, we all already trusted each other, and we all already knew how to communicate with people from different fields. And so we worked very well together addressing that oil spill, and that's something that came from Frontiers. So after being on the organizing committee of the US one, Later, I was asked to be a co-chair for the first Chinese-American Frontiers of Science meeting. So this was an international one involving Chinese scientists and American scientists. So at the time, I was still at MIT, and my Chinese counterpart, who was the other co-chair, was Bai-Chun Li, who was from China. And 10 years later, he's president of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. I'm editor-in-chief of Science Magazine. We already know each other, and we started so many fruitful collaborations between China and the US because we were both in positions to make it happen. We knew each other, and we trusted each other. So for any of you who get an opportunity to go to the Arab-American Frontiers of Science, Engineering, and Medicine meeting, I certainly hope you go because it is a fabulous opportunity to meet the future leaders in science. Let's see. So these are just some of the general benefits which I've already mentioned. Learning how to communicate, understand the different norms of other fields. This was fascinating for me. At my first Frontiers, I realized that the biologists and the earth scientists had a lot more in common because they're both dealing with large complex systems. And there was no underlying, from the bottom up kind of model that you could use to build a full Earth, for example. And whereas chemistry and physics had a lot more in common because they were very reductionist. They could start at an atom, they could start at the fundamental particles, and they could build up their field from that. And so when I was at Frontiers, I would hear the physicists kind of scratching their head, looking at the geoscientists saying, well, why can't you just do the definitive experiment on what the impact of climate change is going to be? And I said to the person, well, the problem is we have no twin Earth that can be our control model for understanding what CO2 is doing to the climate because there is no control for what humans are doing to the planet right now. So I think it was very important to understand the different norms of the different fields. Forging lasting friendships with future science leaders, building trusty relationships with future leaders abroad, like the president of KFAS, and get to know research funders. A lot of research funders come because they know this is where the real good ideas are. So I really encourage you to attend there. And seek mind-opening experiences. I know many of you, this is a great university, and hopefully you'll find students from elsewhere in the world wanting to come here, so you get to know how people think, look, act, communicate from other parts of the world. But some of you may decide to do graduate work abroad, and these are mind-opening experiences, internships, volunteer experiences, spending a year abroad, or doing an unconventional postdoc well outside of what the field was that you studied as an undergraduate. And I just give an example here of one of my daughters. This is my daughter, Dana, who went to Imperial College in London for her junior year abroad. And the college that she attended insisted on all of the students spending a junior year abroad. She was an economics major, so she had to get an internship while she was in London in the general area that would bolster her hands-on experience with economics. So while she was in London, she became the intern to the chief financial officer at a company that I don't even think exists anymore. It's called Skype. How many of you ever heard of Skype? Okay, a lot of people have heard of Skype. Okay, so Skype was a voice over internet opportunity to communicate. And at the time that she was the intern to the CFO at Skype, eBay decided they wanted to buy Skype. But, no surprise, no one at eBay understood how Skype's business model worked because it was free to use. So how did Skype make any money? But when the eBay people came to Skype, they realized they had a huge problem. Namely, everyone at Skype was an owner of the company. They all had stock options. So every single one of them had a conflict of interest in explaining the financial model because, of course, they all wanted to get instantly wealthy and would have said anything to eBay to get this to go through. The only person in the entire company who didn't own stock in Skype was the intern to the CFO. So eBay had her write the buyout terms and what were the milestones that Skype had to reach in the months ahead in order for the buyout to happen. And as a result of that, of course, she had multiple job offers after she graduated and completed her junior abroad, and now she owns a $50 million company. So these mind-opening experiences can be very, very, very helpful. And this is one of the last things I'm going to leave you with, is never sacrifice your integrity. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation of someone who's honest, integrity, is trustworthy, doesn't cut corners, and it takes one wrong choice to ruin that reputation, and you may never get it back again if you lose it. So choose your friends and collaborators wisely. Do not choose to write up. We see so many cases. When I was editor-in-chief of Science, I had so many papers that we were thinking of retracting because of scientific misconduct in it. And I can't tell you how many co-authors would write to me saying, oh, I didn't know that was happening, and I wasn't involved in it. Well, I'm sorry, your name is on the paper, so you are responsible. And if the paper's retracted, well, it's going to reflect on you, and I'm sorry about that. Always take the high road when you have a choice between doing what's expedient or of benefit to you versus what is the right thing to do. Choose the right thing. In the end, it's going to pay off. It's really going to pay off. And third, if something is too good to be true, it probably isn't true. If someone says, oh, we're going to, this happened during the oil spill. BP, which was the company mostly responsible for it, set aside some money for academic researchers to go gather data in the Gulf to try to understand what was happening to the oil, what was the impact on the ecosystem and stuff like that. And they were just throwing out large amounts of money that they would send, that they wanted to send to university researchers. Well, they found out that in the fine print, BP was going to be able to decide whether their work would be published or not. So that was a situation where the money was easy, but it wasn't going to work out well, because if there was anything that BP didn't like in your research, you were going to have wasted your time on it. And finally, protect your reputation at all costs. In terms of honestly reporting the results of your research, not misusing your funds, treating your colleagues, and particularly your junior colleagues, with respect and understanding how important it is that you are there to help further their careers, not stand in their way. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to say is find something significant to do. This didn't happen to me until really late in my career. I was already in my 50s when I was at the USGS working on the oil spill. And I'll tell you, it was the hardest thing, other than the last year in the US. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. The people like me who were fighting the oil spill, we were all stuck down on the Gulf Coast, working from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, every day trying to figure out how to control this oil spill. But what I realized after it was that how many people's lives were fundamentally changed because of the work we were able to do. And I looked back at my publications I had had as an academic researcher working on some fairly esoteric problems, and I realized, you know, I'd be excited if 50 people cared about a paper I wrote, whereas in this case, millions of people cared about what we did to control that oil spill. And I remember as I was leaving, we had been stuck in Houston for 4 months dealing with the oil spill. And I got to be a good friend with a young Coast Guard lieutenant. And he asked me, as I was leaving, he said, "How has the oil spill changed you?" And I said, "I don't think I will ever be able to do something that's insignificant again, just because of the number of people's lives it changed." And after that, this gentleman in the middle, his name is, he's a hydrologist, and his name is Paul Shea. He was also at the USGS, and in order to bring the oil spill to an end, we had finally exhausted the safe solutions. And the safe solutions were a top kill for the well, trying to put a cofferdam on it, all sorts of things that none of them worked. And none of them worked because BP had underestimated the flow rate of the well by an order of magnitude. So none of those were working. So our last gasp, we were still waiting for the relief wells to kill the well from below, but that was still months off. So the last idea we were going to try was to bring in a capping stack and shut in the well from above. The reason why BP didn't like that solution was that no one knew if during the original explosion that destroyed the well, if the liner in the well had been damaged. And if the liner in the well had been damaged, if we closed it in from above, it would be like taking a garden hose, putting your hand on the end to stop the water from coming out, and if there are tears in the hose, the water's just going to come out everywhere else. And so BP was worried for that reason that we would take a single point of egress for the oil spill and turn it into dozens all through the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. So the agreement we reached with BP was that what we would do is close the well in from above, and we would monitor the pressure on that well, sort of like monitoring the pressure against your hand on a hose. If the pressure's really high, then you know the oil isn't escaping anywhere else. If the pressure starts dropping, then the oil's going somewhere else, and you've got a problem, and you better open up that well really fast before you create hydrofracking oil all through the Gulf. So I brought in Paul Shea as a hydrologist because he dealt with aquifers and very similar processes in oil reservoirs. And he was going to do the calculations as to whether we had been successful. So we closed in the well, and instead of the pressure being really high or being really low, it was in the no man's land. The no man's land of not knowing whether the well was intact or whether it had some leaks in the liner. So Paul stayed up all night working on this problem. And he explained to me, as he was trying to figure out which it was, intact well or broken well, he said the only thing he kept thinking about was a Mars mission that NASA had recently sent to the planet, and the spacecraft missed the planet. And it missed the planet because the engineer had done an incorrect units conversion from metric to English units. And all of the data we had from BP was in English units, and all of Paul's programs ran in metric. So we had to make sure that he took all the input data, changed it all appropriately, and he didn't want to do what NASA did and totally mess up because of the conversion. Well, the next morning, he came into us and he said, the well's intact. So it stayed shut in, the oil spill ended. 2 months later, the relief wells finally killed it from below, but the oil spill ended 2 months earlier than it would have. And this is a picture of Paul getting the top award in the United States for any government employee. Any government employee, no matter whether they're a scientist or whatever they do, he was awarded the top award for having ended the oil spill. So that's the importance of doing something significant. And then finally, let me just end by saying, you've got to believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, no one else is. There will be those who judge you without knowing you. There will be those who will attack you to merely cover up their own shortcomings. Some will view challenging you in your beliefs as sport. And if you don't believe in you, it's more difficult for anyone else to believe in you. So I hope you all develop a strong belief that you're here for a good reason and you're doing what you were meant to do. I remember when I was a freshman in college, I had an advisor in college, and his name was Wilbur Wright III. He was the grandson of the original aviator, and I was starstruck. I thought, oh my God, I've got this this advisor who comes from such a famous family. This is going to be amazing. Well, when I went to meet him the first time, he said to me, you must have said something silly on your application about wanting to major in physics. He said, girls have come and gone in this department, but never one has graduated. So you might start thinking about what else you're going to do. Well, it turns out my parents had sent me to an all-women's school for all through elementary school, junior high, and high school. So my physics teacher in high school was a woman, and she was a really good physicist. So I just looked at Wilbur Wright III and I said, well, there must be something wrong with you then, if no woman has ever graduated from this department, because women can certainly do physics. And so I believed in myself because I had had mentors who helped me believe in myself and told me that if that's what I wanted to do, I could do it. So I think I'm going to end there and just take any questions. And I think, Dalal, you're going to come and moderate the questions, or? Yeah, great. Thanks.